Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third social housing roundtable of the year. Already losing me numbers. My name's Matt Baird. I'm joined this week by Dr. Hannah Absalom, who I'm going to get to introduce and everything in just a moment. Welcome. If you are new to the social housing roundtable, I can see a lot of familiar faces in the room, but I'm getting notes every week of new people finding us, finding out about the community, finding out what we're doing. I say we're over 750 people now, which is just wild. That number keeps seeming to grow, so I'll have to keep an eye on numbers. But the idea behind these is very, very simple, to be honest with you. It was set up during the initial lockdown as a place where people could come together and ask key questions that sometimes you only hear about at conferences, or sometimes you have a burning desire to ask about or discuss, but don't really have the connections in the sector, or maybe you only have one or two people in the sector to speak to. And this community has grown and grown, and we've discussed so many topics. And every week, I've said this before, but I think we've discussed just about everything. And then suddenly I keep finding more and more conversation pieces that keep coming up, which is amazing. My day-to-day job is I've got a few different strings. So I'm co-chair of the board for Spring Housing in Birmingham, which is an amazing charity focusing on homelessness and refugees and young people, which is just an amazing opportunity to be involved with. And I'm also a recruiter. So I've been recruiting in social housing for over 11 years. I set up on my own nearly exactly 3 years ago with the idea that if I was going to be paid using tenants' money, I was going to do something better than, spend it on a big old party every week. So this is one of those initiatives, and I try and help with in a few different forums and things like that as well, which are all voluntary. But it's just so great to see so many people in the group today. As ever, if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat, please feel free to. During the presentation, feel free to put questions or anything like that in the chat, and I'll make sure we come to them. But the first kind of 20 minutes, half an hour will be Hannah presenting on today's topic, and then there will be a more open forum discussion to follow. So without further ado, rather than make the introduction for you, it's another amazing person I've met through the power of LinkedIn, which is a wonderful system for meeting new people. But Hannah, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself, and thank you so much for coming today, because it's genuinely a topic that I think needs a lot more focus on. So it's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Matt. I really enjoy this opportunity to speak to people about my research and check I'm not going up an academic deep end somewhere and it's still like relevant to people. So I'll crack on with the presentation, as I appreciate everyone's time is precious. And I think what you'll see from the presentation, a key part of thinking about emotions in housing is discussing this topic. So, pardon me as I just sort out how it works. So, here's the structure for today. So, I'll cover who I am. I'm going to cover some of the wider debates as well, because I've found from my experiences of discussing emotions in housing with senior decision makers, it can get a little bit dismissed as that's nice, but it doesn't fit on my spreadsheet. And it's like, well, actually, no, this is a huge topic with international interest in terms of academic research. And I really think the way I frame it is I think there's some secret sauce in thinking through emotions that can benefit housing. I'm then going to introduce you to a relational perspective. So you'll have to bear in mind, if you're not somebody who leaves academic ways, if that isn't a strong interest to you. But I think half of the issues with using emotional insights is the sort of the ethical wrapper on how to guide their use essentially as well. Oh, if I stop my own video, that might help with the connection. So let's see if that helps.
No worries, Hannah.
Yeah, I don't know why. It seems to be happy with me, the presentation, but not me at the same time. So I'm Dr. Hannah Absalom. And
we've lost your video. You've turned your video off.
The screen though, can't you? The presentation.
No, can't see. We can't see the share screen. I can't see your video of you basically either. So everyone's having a slight technical moment.
Yeah, it's.
We had this all sorted in the practice. We were all.
No, that should. Can you see it now?
I can see the screen. I can't see you, but we can at least see the presentation.
If I stop myself being seen and just have the presentation, it should resolve any audio problems. As long as you can see the presentation, that's fine.
Great. Cheers, Hannah.
No worries. So I'm Dr. Hannah Absalom, and my PhD is in human geography, and I studied the use of behavioural insights in English social housing. Human geography is sort of broadly interested in context and scales and sort of complex, in this world, political and social problems. It's sort of like cultural studies, basically. I worked in the sector for 18 years in a variety of roles, and I was really motivated to undertake my studies due to encountering the frustrations that were experienced by my tenant volunteers in finding decent housing and work. It was just pretty depressing, actually, watching some of these situations unfold. I'm currently based at the University of Birmingham, undertaking an ESRC fellowship. For people not in academia, an ESRC fellowship is considered quite a big deal because it's a year-long contract to develop some of the research from my thesis, basically. All right. So I'm just going to situate the discussion about emotions in wider debates about public policy. So why do emotions matter in public administration, or also organisation administration in general? There's a traditional understanding of how public organisations are administered, and it's called the Beberian approach to understanding organisations. Long story short, it emphasises rational decision-making, hierarchical structures, accountability processes, and essentially it tends to overlook the emotional dimensions of decision-making. Research is really finding that emotions are more relevant and can't really be designed out of organisation structures, and they influence how policymakers, practitioners and the public perceive, interpret and respond to policy challenges. Real-world drivers of interest in emotions in policy is the increasing complexity of policy challenges, global crisis and uncertainty. So I think COVID-19 is a really good example of how that was a highly emotional topic, and facts and evidence was not really making a strong case a lot of the time, and a lot of the reactions to COVID were emotionally driven rather than rationality driven. There's been huge advances in behavioural science, and that was really where I started with my research, looking at how behavioural insights are used in English social housing. But I've moved away a little bit from that, and I'm a little bit more interested in emotions and how emotions can be put to work ethically in housing work. Alongside this is an increased focus on well-being. And this is essentially an interest in the emotional and psychological well-being of individuals. And this is really starting to shape the social
I'm losing you, Hannah, unfortunately. I'm losing you a bit there.
So there's some key...
Yeah, we're losing your connection a little bit. I don't know whether it's
Yeah, it's the weather and the internet.
Okay, I'll leave you to crack on. We'll see how well we go through.
I can't hop on my neighbour's internet because that's totally broken this morning. So just let me know if there's any problems and I will try stopping and starting again. The key questions, do you know what? I chose not to go to university because I thought the internet connection would be better as well. So key questions driving this debate within public administration: rationality versus emotionality, ethical considerations, and also cultural variability. But I'm going to focus a little bit more today on this notion of instrumental versus relational use of emotions. So I'd ask you to bear in mind this question: are emotions strategic tools to achieve institutional goals, or do they permit a deeper connective mode of policy making? Because I think that's an important question to reflect when thinking about using emotional approaches. It's quite clear I lean towards a relational perspective. So I'll just outline what it means to take a relational framework when thinking about emotions. It's this idea of interconnected concepts. So, basically what works in a real world setting, rather than being a sort of intellectual purist and saying, I'm only interested in behavioural science, or I'm only interested in geography. It's kind of thinking, well, what works within the context we're trying to change, and sort of using developing a working understanding that fits that particular context. So I argue as well that housing work is a heavily contextual mode of working as well. It probably explains why the housing roundtable discussions have been so broad in the topics that have been covered, is because housing is fundamentally a contextual topic, basically. We all live our lives from our homes, and that's going to introduce a huge amount of variation and lots of different experiences, and introduce a lot of different problems that are going to be relevant in the housing world. There is also a focus on networks, and that is a social connection, basically, as well as sort of decision-making structures. And, you know, it's just thinking about who's affected, how they're affected, how they relate to other people who are in that problem space. There is also a perspective that thinks about things within networks, but I won't distract by talking about that today. Tricky concept to get into.
Oh, Hannah, hang on, we've lost you. Give it a sec.
This notion of emergence. Yeah.
There we
Honestly, I've made a choice not to go in.
So I think we've got you back now. It's sometimes
internet.
it just drops out a little bit and you sound like a Dalek. So we're just trying to, we're working through it. Okay, I totally volume down a bit and it seems to be working a bit better. But yeah, I'll leave you to it. I'll just let you know if we do lose you intermittently.
Please do, because I appreciate this is probably the heaviest bit of the presentation, and it's the bit I really don't want the connection to drop. So this concept of emergence is that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, and the interactions between components give rise to new unexpected qualities. It's quite a big concept, but I think it helps to anchor it by thinking of something like trust. You know, trust, you develop trust through interactions with other people. It's not something you can easily grab hold of. It emerges as you interact with the world, as you interact with others. And it's something that's really easily lost through those interactions as well. So basically, when dealing with complex problems in big networks of people, things are going to emerge that you might have anticipated and you might not have anticipated. There is this issue as well with relational thinking of complexity and unpredictability. And this really draws in the point that in order to navigate these complicated networks, you need to collaborate. And really considering how, you know, in a sort of academic level, relational frameworks are quite complicated to study, in practice, it's often just about having good conversations and having conversations that are sensitive to power disagreements, power differences and disagreements, and also an approach to collaboration that values the process of working together, not just the outcomes. So really, it's quite, as I say, quite complex to grasp intellectually, but quite straightforward in terms of implementation. So I was thinking quite a lot about relational framing when I was doing my thesis towards the end. And in the first report I wrote, Understanding Home as an Emotional Place, I used a definition of home that is a relational definition. So basically what I'm saying in this quotation, home is understood first as a material environment that provides safety and stability, a cocoon that provides both physical protection and respite from the stresses and pressures of life. Second, the environment of the home is psychologically significant. We express ourselves through the home, and the home itself shapes our sense of who we are. So what I'm saying here in this relational conception of the home is that the material condition of the home and the individual emotional well-being are interconnected. One sort of produces the other. I think in housing, we tend to think of the home as a bit of a stage set. It doesn't really shape how people's well-beings or social outcomes. It's up to them to kind of like create the home. And I argue that now the condition a home's provided in, the services that focus on the condition, and the sensitivity to emotional well-being are all really valuable in reimagining housing work so it's more emotionally informed. So I'll just untangle this a little bit more in this slide here. But yeah, another point to draw out is this relationship with home is always in process. you never finish homemaking and you never finish self-work as well. And I think this is just a helpful perspective to think about
Hannah,
home
2 secs.
as, you know, it doesn't end. There's
Anna, right, I just give it a second. We just had you again swimming through a tunnel, I think. So hopefully we'll have you back now.
I appreciate doing this, Matt, and I can't believe it's happened this
It's all
morning.
good. Don't worry at all. We've got you back.
So yeah, it's this idea really that you know, it doesn't end when we hand over the keys. The process of supporting people make a home and make themselves is never finished. And I think some of the questions really are around what is the landlord's role in these processes. But in terms of practical work, this relational framing of the home draws attention to the emotional condition of the home and the relationships people have with themselves, with the homes, and with others. And this is what I mean by relational thinking. Once you start applying it to practical issues, it becomes a little bit more straightforward. So this is really about thinking a little bit more about that relation with the self, the homes, and with other people. That's the core takeaway, I'd say, from an emotional perspective. So as I say, I've introduced that framework because I think it helps produce a different understanding of the home that we might not be used to working with. And that different understanding of the home, I think, can result in more ethical housing work and help guide the implication of the application, not implication, of emotional knowledge in housing. I'm very cautious about not having wrappers and just showing you insights which are then used without questioning you know, the organisation context, tenant relationships with home and other things. So now I'll get onto the bit you probably came for, which is the emotional insight. This is what that came from my thesis analysis. And this is a quotation from a tenant, and I have to say their transcript was actually really quite upsetting in places. It probably made me interested in the emotions being so upset by this interview. This person had fled domestic violence, been allocated a property and was very excited. And this is a quotation. To be fair, the whole house was gutted out. And because I accepted the house as it was, I felt like it was my responsibility. All my savings went on putting flooring down in the entire house. They do give you decorating vouchers. I think I got £150. It was helpful. I was very grateful, but it was me supporting me and the little one, that I wouldn't know what I would do. The back garden was horrendous, and with a baby, I could not have a back garden. That was dangerous. I know it sounds pathetic or maybe irrelevant, but when you have a little one, you want it to be safe, to have fun in the garden. So that quotation, I think, really exemplifies that idea of the condition of the home is heavily entangled with a sense of self. And this experience is shaped somebody, it's challenging somebody's sense of who they are as a mother, their capacity to provide and turn the home. They're heavily reliant on the people network around them to turn this property into a home. But I contrast this with what I've described as a slightly Disney-esque narrative of a forever home in the sector. Sorry, academic work does involve criticism. And a report from the National Housing Federation about homelessness and the forever home. This is from an extract.
Losing you, Hannah. Hang on, 2 secs.
This report describes how the families.
Give it a second. Hopefully, we'll get you back. I lost you for just a second there. Hopefully, we've got you back now.
Excellent. I am so getting on to my provider after this. The report describes how the families were in general delighted to have been given a home. They got the happy ending, we're in their forever home. It completely changed our lives, and we are so fortunate. My point I want to make on this from an emotional perspective is as human beings, we're natural storytellers. And we need to be quite aware of these stories that we tell ourselves that distract ourselves from engaging with realities we might not want to hear about, basically. So this narrative of a fairy tale not only it reinforces this notion that landlord responsibility ends at key handover, it also creates this interrogation, deadening notion of the forever home and a happy ending. It's not an ending, it's a beginning for the person who's moved into the property. And it encourages this performance of gratefulness. So you'll notice the tenant in this extract said, I was very grateful. It wasn't the only tenant who mentioned this feeling of being grateful at being allocated a home. But you'll see in the later bits of the extract, she's feeling sounding pathetic, irrelevant, she's feeling overwhelmed by the dangerous garden. She is still grateful, but there's more going on under the surface of this performance of gratefulness. So, as I say, a geographical perspective of emotions highlights emotional ambiguity and tensions and encourages sort of these deadening stories that we tell ourselves to stop looking at things, basically, encourages those to be sort of challenged and interrogated. Here's another insight from homelessness research. And this is from a paper I read, which was really quite inspiring. And it's an interview with somebody called Doug, who is describing the transition from supported home.
Hannah, can you repeat that bit? Sorry, we lost you there.
Oh, yeah. So this is a paper about homelessness, and the extract is from somebody called Doug, who's describing a transition from good quality homeless supported accommodation into getting his general needs tenancy. So this is beyond the next. This is the next step beyond the forever home discourse. The worst thing is loneliness. Well, who needs it? Isn't it a lovely flat and you're sitting down all on your own? It's not a good feeling, yeah. And that's the reason why some people would rather be here, because in the hostel, there's such a community and it feels like, you know what I mean? There's someone around you and stuff. But to put someone else out in the real wide world to say, oh, there's your keys. And it's like, oh, hell. And it really draws attention to the need to be sensitive to a person. Cheers.
It's all right. I did. Yeah, like I said, and it's like oh hell, and then it kind of just drifts.
Oh well, that's timing, wasn't it? Yeah. So I think this draws attention to the need to be sensitive to a person's journey into a home, basically. And this is what relational thinking is also interested about. It's not just about relationships that are happening now, it's also considering the effect of past relationships. So this person has ended up being homeless, they've experienced positive relationships in the supported environment setting, and then suddenly it's a cliff edge in terms of relationships and connections. And so really it's being sensitive to things like homelessness, trauma, traumatic relationship, and this idea of traumatic relationships with home environments, as this can create a situation where people really struggle with things like housing stability. And what we think of a really positive thing, and it is a positive thing, being giving people housing stability, is not experienced as something positive. It's experienced as something frightening by some people. And that may lead to them self-censoring and not telling you some of these problems as well, especially when you've built up this idea of a forever home as well. It puts a bit of pressure on people to feel like they should be grateful. And I'd say, yeah, this working with this knowledge of what is making this experience unpleasant for this person can actually work to contribute towards tenancy sustainment as well. Oh, this is a great project. I really encourage you to read the Rent Flex evaluation. And this is a quotation from the Rent Flex evaluation report. So I think in housing, in terms of social value, we're very used to sort of determining what social value looks like ahead of time. And then trying to fit people into this sort of like accountancy process so we can then extrapolate a cash equivalent for the well-being outcome we've produced by working with this person. In Rent Flex, the idea is to restructure how rent is paid so it can basically be used as a 0% interest-free loan. It's a wonderful initiative. I've definitely looked at it. But anyway, this person describes using Rent Flex to have a month rent-free and then using that money to take their daughter on holiday. And I just thought this is a really good example of how you can't always predict what well-being outcomes are going to be. And I suspect for some people as well, there might be a bit of stigma in there as well. Oh, well, she's just spent it on a holiday. She should have spent it on something else. No, it's not for us to judge what people, it's well-being in people's lives, essentially. There is a need to sort of free up capacity for people to make their own well-being choices and maybe back away a little bit from trying to claim so much credit for these outcomes. But yeah, essentially thinking relationally, because it thinks about networks and complexity. It challenges this idea of deciding well-being at a distance and ahead of a time, and encourages thinking a little bit more about how can we create more options for people to actualize their own well-being. I'll just quickly go through some of the limitations and benefits. Possible limitations, cultural change. I have a big sort of amber flag over just importing trauma-informed design principles into social housing practice. There is lots of really positive stuff to learn in trauma-informed design, but until the sector, I think, really deals with this tendency to label ourselves as sort of rescuers and tenants coming in as having various shades of vulnerability, it could become quite a tyranny, really, for tenants. You know, it's not about ferreting out trauma so we can treat it. It's about holding that understanding lightly and working with tenants how we might be able to build better interventions. And also, not everyone's coming into housing with trauma. Some people are not coming in with that. We still need to account for the fact that home is an emotional place, whether trauma is a pathway or not. Pathologizing tenants, that just basically says we risk only seeing them through a psychological lens rather than as a complex human being. A risk of the tyranny of the tearful if a simple conception of emotions is adopted. Home is experienced ambiguously. It's not the landlord's job to sort of provide endless happiness. There is going to be negative experiences in the home. You can't take ownership to such an extent, but you can try and understand what processes enable people to be more successful at making a home, where that process of making a home might be made more fragile. But yeah, it's just a concern of emotional perspectives as they come to dominate. Overreaching, where's the cut-off point? Metricization, and I do get this, there is an absolute measurement problem. You know, how organizations only tend to work on things that can be made visible. They tend to be made visible through measurements, yet when you're measuring, you're changing what it is you're looking at. So I think there just needs to be some more thoughtful approaches to developing metricization, basically, and how we measure and make visible what matters. It takes longer because it involves talking and thinking rather than just doing. It's at the cutting edge of theory and research, so there's lots to learn and explore. And I actually think this is quite an exciting time for social housing practice to author its own professional standards. But anyway, and also just some people just don't want a relationship with the landlord. They just want you to turn up, do the repairs and go away again. So, you know, there is sort of thinking about and respecting that desire to not be that engaged. Possible benefits for the sector: clarity of social purpose. I am so focusing on social purpose and another bit of research at the moment. I think we're lacking a focus on the domain of housing. I think a relational understanding of the home really recenters that. It makes visible the material condition of the home. If anyone's been to any of the presentations before, you'll be sick to death of me mentioning furnished tenancies, offering people completely empty boxes with no carpets, no curtains, no means to make it a home is not socially valuable. It's quite cruel, actually, for some people in some pathways. Where housing plays a key role in reducing cognitive distress and harm. So I did a bit of research project with tenants where we explored what made them angry and fearful about the home. We ended up with a big complex topic issue of domestic abuse, of which my second report, Changing the Story of Domestic Abuse, is all about that. And also my current research project, which is just looking at how tenants encounter landlords within the environment of the home. So I think there is a clarity of social purpose there and new questions that are produced, such as home encounters, and new weighting given to old problems such as domestic abuse. Refocus of tenant engagement to centre what matters for tenants, basically. You've got to, have a grounding in what matters for the tenants about the home and landlord services. To explore how to work with emotions and engagement activity. I won't go too much off on that one, but I'm really thinking tenant engagement needs a wholesale review. And drawing more co-creative collective approaches to working. In my Home is an Emotional Place report, I describe a 3-tier approach to engagement, which is a good starting point. I think it can reinvigorate practice. It can reveal roles that kind of produce negativity. So I'm going back to this notion of emergence, and I think allocations is actually quite an emotionally difficult job. And I don't think we support our staff enough, actually, our colleagues who work in allocations. It's also an area of work where I notice it tends to produce, as an emergent property, quite a lot of cynicism. And I'm not surprised, really, because it's a role where you're administrating misery fundamentally. And I think some insights, really, some thinking about how we can emotionally support colleagues doing these very emotionally charged roles, and maybe counterbalance some of the tendencies such roles produce, such as cynicism about believing domestic abuse claims, can be countered by conversations and emotional insights that can just help temper that tendency. But it needs to be done collectively. It's not something that should be imposed. And I think this is about identifying techniques to explore and to develop an emotionally informed professionalism. So we use the word professionalism a lot, but we kind of fill it with what our own meaning is. And I think if we accept that home is an emotional place, accept that relational understanding of home, then how you imagine professionalism is different to how you imagine professionalism when you're not sort of thinking of home as an emotional place. Benefits to policy. This is a big one to me. There's been lots of regulatory reform and it's still ongoing. Some of it is looking good. Some of it I've got question marks over. And one is, where is the listening side of regulatory reform? There's a lot of supporting tenants to complain, which is good work, but there's not really counterbalanced by supporting landlords to reflect on where their organisation is inhibiting their capacity to listen and also to act. So I've developed some thinking in that space, but I won't go into that now. And also, there's a fundamental challenge to our cultural imagination of what the purpose of housing is. And this is put nicely in this tension, really. Is it to provide some sort of stability, or is it as a vehicle to make profit? And I think once you start thinking about home as a material environment that psychologically shapes us, then this idea of just making profit just becomes a bit problematic. So I've touched upon this. I've got a couple of research plans. One I'm in the middle of, home encounters, how tenants and landlords encounter each other in the tenant's home. And all my research questions on that one are heavily emotionally weighted, because I think drawing that out will result in better encounters. I'm also pulling something together on environmental sensors in general needs homes. It's still at the research proposal phase. But I'm wanting to explore what I'm starting to call more a head and heart approach to thinking about these types of topics, because they need to be considered through a rational gaze. What is the objective purpose of these items, and also an emotional gaze, what are the unanticipated emotional effects of these sort of sensor techs going into tenants' homes. So that's just to give you a sense of some of the issues I'm looking at through this emotional sort of thinking. And that's it. I'll have thanks for surviving the world's worst internet connection. I'll stop the share and hopefully.
It's all right. I mean, the irony is the last 5 minutes has been all right. It was, I can't believe I just jinxed that, but yeah, it was. I mean, the chat, for what it's worth, has been really run over. I know a couple of people have asked about whether you're happy sharing the presentation, because there was such an influx of info, and it's great to see that. So thank you very much. I'll make sure that gets shared around. I'll go through some of the key highlight points, but if anybody would like to raise their point, please just use the raise hand function, because I'd love to kind of hear from you directly. So where were we? So Tony had said the only constant really is change, and then Gabby, complexity and unpredictability. The sector needs to get better at embracing volatility and not considering it a bad thing inherently. Volatility is the way of the world, and it's mostly scary and bad to those who are afraid of losing their position of power. And I don't know your thoughts on that, Hannah.
Yeah, I think there's like the paper I'm drafting up at the moment. I'm exploring this notion of what housing stability means. And I think there is a lot of instability in the sector through things like endless restructures. I know when doing my research, it kind of made the ethics a bit easier because when a year after I'd interviewed people, they don't restructured, so I didn't have to worry so much about obscuring the organisation. And I think that it's helpful to think through tensions. You know, I'm not pro making housing precarious. I think housing is something that is more, its value is developed through stable, affordable housing offers. And we need to sort of like start authoring our own change rather than just constantly reacting and just going, well, it's sort of inevitable. Yes, it is. But what change is valuable and what stuff do we need to hold on and keep the same? And I've noticed a tendency in the sector whenever I'm liaised with about sort of consultancy work, and universities do this as well. Every organisation is obsessed with having their own unique sales thing. Like, we want to do something differently. How about just doing housing work really well rather than trying to do this sort of brand housing thing? So
There's a lot of people out there, I think, trying to fix the wheel, as it were, and unfortunately, we see it all the time. And as both Steve and Michelle have alluded to, trust is easily lost, extremely hard to get back. It's one of the biggest issues we've got, and those with better emotion regulation abilities have shown to have more robust relationships and social connections, which is great, and I think really ties into a lot of what the research was showing. Olu, I'm going to bring you in. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Almost afternoon now. What I've come up to discuss was what I'd already stated in the chat. I get everything Hannah is talking about, this whole emotional, and again, brilliant presentation. But what it then boils down to affordability, because it's good. Because for example, where you said, what's it called? When people are housed, it's okay it's not helpful moving them probably to an area where they might potentially be isolated from, family, friends, or supporting network that they are used to. But if that area is the only way we can get them affordable housing, then what's the council to do? So that's what I wanted to say, that where does affordability come into that? Because that is the most important thing when, as a housing option officer, I'm trying to put a homeless family into where to make them a final offer that has to be reasonable, suitable, and affordable. Most importantly, if I can't find anything affordable and the area where I can find something affordable is not quite where they would want to go, what's the opposite to do? How would you come up with, what would you say in regards to that? Thank you.
Oh no, so really good questions, and I think there is real solid problems in housing where there's no perfect solutions or right outcomes. One thing I'm starting to realise a little bit more about with emotional work, it can help you understand what's in your gift to give, and sort of accept that in a little way, really, and also what stuff needs to be a topic for campaigning for change. So, you are stuck with this problem of somebody's going to be moving into an area they don't want to live in. And I think part of that, at that sort of operational level, is having the conversations, helping people understand these are limited choices, and having conversations with them about what's emotionally important for them in an area. Is there ways they can be introduced to help get acclimatized to the area? Because I know when I've discussed this topic with tenants as well, they've suggested things like volunteer programs where local tenants can introduce people to the areas, so at least there's a named person. And if we look back at some real tragic cases that have happened in housing, that human connection and introducing people to those localities can be really important work. But I'd also say these emotional perspectives are needing to be unpacked and researched a little bit more. So that would be potentially an interesting research project. But yeah, we are always going to come back to the issue of affordability. And then I think it does come to more political questions. And that's why I put in there about that. When it comes to housing policy, having that fundamental shift as a nation away from seeing home as a vehicle to make money and seeing it as fundamentally about providing people, in the academic terms, ontological security. But that just means the stability to become the best version of who you are, basically. So I think there's fundamental issues there. In terms of affordability, I'll also bring up the example of 13 Group, who've radically reformed their housing allocation processes, initially spending more upfront and then finding out it's producing savings in other areas. So reduced turnaround costs. When a property is coming back, it's coming back in needing less repairs, basically, longer tenancies. So I think this is what I mean when it comes to metricization. There needs to be slightly more exploratory ways of assessing how these relational approaches produce value, because they tend to, because they're happening within complex systems, it's hard to say action A leads to outcome B, leads to outcome C.
It's really interesting, though, because you can see in the chat, so Hazel's put there that Wales have introduced legislation that all homes are now let with flooring. And it ties into Ellie Darling's point, which was that, because Ellie works extensively in complaints and has seen with different providers that when we use language like property instead of your home, we're emphasizing that authoritative relationship of the landlord. And it ties very much into your point earlier, which I liked in the presentation, which is the idea that people feel grateful, and almost we expect them to feel grateful because at least they've got something, rather than kind of going, yeah, but this isn't great. Yeah, but it's something. And it's that kind of mindset. I'm going to bring Michael in. Thank you for being patient there, Michael. But I think it's interesting looking at this stuff with policies and, you know, reasonable adjustments and that kind of stuff to go, well, actually, if we get it right at the beginning, the rest can look after itself much, much better. Michael, do come in. Still got you on mute at the moment. Let me try and unmute.
And you can see me as well?
Yes, yeah. I can. Lovely.
Kimono Tuesday for me, so this is it. But it's around quality. I think that there's something that providing. There's two things that I wanted to pick up, and I joined late, so I'm sorry, but I guess I missed the problem with the internet, so the connection. But first one is that providing kind of furnished tenancies and those things, that these are the quality and of the product that's provided is fairly poor. In my estimation, kind of, it doesn't last, or it's and it's about that personalization and the quality that we can bring into for individuals in that area, which is very, very difficult. But the one thing that really saddened me every time I was going into a new tenancy, doing a check when I was a housing officer, was the part of seeing somebody who hadn't put down hadn't made the home themselves because they saw it as an impermanent. The impermanence of it, and I think that there's kind of lots of things that go together. So the furnished side of it, which is very expensive, and then a barrier to potentially going into work because it's all benefits based. And I think that we're tying people in, or people are being tied home. You know, the householders are tied into kind of a bit of a vicious cycle or a trap. With the ways that we try to make. So it needs a bit more creativity, and I'm wondering about what creativity could there be around personalizing and making someone actually have that stake in that kind of that stake in their home that we've got. So maybe it's been covered, but I don't know. That's just what I wanted to say.
Oh, no, thank you, Michael. I'll pass you back to Hannah.
I actually wrote about this in my thesis. I think half of the problem is we tend to look at allocations as a core business process, so it's not seen as producing social value. So there's a challenge to government and the way we measure how allocations are done, to sort of see it as a core site where social value isn't yet being mined. Because while it's still seen as core business process, then cost efficiency mindset comes in rather than spending to produce social value. And this is why you get crap quality, basically, which is just another offence in some ways, really, isn't it? In terms of personalisation, I think there's opportunities in technology. You know, you can show people the property before they move in, give choices over things like what colour do you want the wall, is there some wallpaper you'd like us to put up? So maximise that void turnover use, basically. I think it's also about identifying which groups would potentially benefit, and I realise there's logical complexities in talking of groups when talking about personalisation. But I go back to this point of domestic abuse. I'm just incredulous that the sector is not doing more, quite frankly. Housing is there in all of the research as a foundation in aiding successful exiting of abusive situations. It can save lives. Yet we're not seeing that in things like allocations. You get allocations right for somebody who's fleeing domestic abuse, you're saving a life. I mean, if you want to use an economic assessment on that, find me the figure for saving somebody from being murdered. You know, this is serious. That's the serious level stuff. And when you come to things like personalisation, trauma-informed design, you know, is all about thinking about how you can make an environment safe. And when I've discussed this topic with tenants, you'll have some who will want high fencing because they don't want people looking in the property. You'll have some who want low fencing because they want to feel safe for surveilling the property. And I think there's work around how to personalise these processes for groups who are particularly going to benefit, if you're going to think about it as an organisational way. And I would put domestic abuse really at the top, where housing can make a big difference on that one. And as I say, if you think differently about allocations, work with somebody to have those conversations about making a home. You need to think about the pre-allocation space. What is the trajectory that's put somebody into this pathway? I absolutely agree with this point of impermanence. It came up in my interview where somebody, because they'd come from insecure homeless accommodation, they lived in one room for 2 years, I think it was, because they couldn't trust turning that property into a home because of the trauma of temporary accommodation. There's 94,000 households in temporary accommodation as of June 2023. That's a lot of...
And unfortunately, that number is only going to go higher, I think, through this week.
Yes.
And I think we're going to have issues. I was talking to a trans man yesterday who he's been to a supported housing space, and so much of it was, I just wanted support workers, housing officers to understand that this wasn't safe for me, but people couldn't understand why there were things in there, and I'm hoping to get them on a future roundtable, but there are bits there that weren't safe. And on that, actually, I'm going to bring Sophie in, because Sophie works in the supported housing space. So I imagine, Sophie, a lot of this has really resonated with you.
Yeah, and I mean, since the discussion started, 10 minutes ago, I've furiously written down loads of notes, and it's something you could just talk about all day. But I think it is something that, with people talk about the term, whether you should refer to them as customers, tenants, residents, and all that kind of thing. And I've had people say, we refer to our as customers, and people have said that we shouldn't do that because it implies that they have choice. And that really concerns me, because they absolutely they should have that choice. And everything that we've already said, you know, is that they should be able to choose, this is where I want to live, firstly, for these reasons, you know. But in terms of supported, I mean, our customers do tend to have a lot of choice, but that's because of the kind of niche, if you like, of the residents that I deal with. We don't deal with sort of long waiting lists and things like that. We don't have those pressures and the challenges that, you know, people working in general needs allocations have. I just really wanted to touch on, and it's funny because I was talking to my partner about this morning, so it's really weird that it's come up now, but talking about, you know, the floor covering and things like that. And this is something that I'm almost quite embarrassed about, but when I was young, and I remember going sort of around my friends' houses to play, my friends who didn't have carpets and things like that, I definitely, as a child and being quite innocent, I wouldn't have gone, well, they live in social housing. But I knew that there was something that was different to me, and I totally, you know, and I'm embarrassed to admit that I recognised that difference. But all that is going to do, you know, everybody talks about removing the stigma that's attached to people living in social housing and things like that. And I think that with, you know, all that is going to do is almost fuel that stigma, you know. And you know, you give a single, this is such a generalization, but you give somebody who has fled domestic violence, is starting their life again, for example, you give them money in decorating vouchers, they've got children, are they going to spend it on decorating their property? You know, who are we to say you must spend that on this when you've got children that, you know, you're starting in a new area and everything. And I think my very final point, without going on and on and on, because I could go on all day, is it would be really good to see, because I think it was in the chat, I'd seen a comment. I've worked with some amazing frontline housing officers who want to make such a difference, and they get almost, you know, personally invested with people's lives because they can see that, you know, they're going through trauma, or they've been through trauma and they're starting again, or whatever it is, only for it to get passed up the channels and then blocked it from at a certain point. It would be really great to see more kind of executive teams attending sessions like this, chief execs, people who may well have worked frontline a long time ago but are now so out of touch with the challenges that are faced by frontline housing officers, because times have changed so much and there have been so many tragedies in housing that shouldn't have happened. We're always so reactive to things that have, you know, these terrible stories that we read, we're so reactive. But it kind of feels like nobody, they're not interested until something bad happens. Yeah, so I'm gonna get off my soapbox now.
Please don't. It's great, and I think this is so much of where the conversations from the roundtables have led. And as you say, I this always goes out to everybody, and I'd love to hear more voices from chief execs coming in. As we've seen in the chat there, Claire's mentioned it's the absence of dignity of people, and I think that ties into what you're saying there. Gabby, I think if we'd finally get our act together collectively, people will stop focusing on what term is being used. What was really interesting is I've spoken to tenants, multiple tenants, some saying, please don't call me a customer. Another turned around to me and said, please call me a customer because then I've got more power. Because if I'm a customer, I've got more influence. And so it's interesting to kind of see how those two are doing. Hazel's pointed out that Bromford are working with Uplifted on a recycled flooring pilot. So definitely reach out to Hazel, I imagine, for more info on that, or to look at Uplifted. And Ibrahim has said that the Housing Ombudsman report today mentioned in seeing some good examples of a human-centric, sensitive and tailored service to customer residents, as there's a definite link between poor housing and public health. And I'm doing a number of series this year, one with the CIH and one with Walsall Housing Group on the roundtable, including some Thursday sessions on health and housing and the link between the two. And I think it's going to be a really big key point of this year. Before I go back to the chat, I'm going to bring in Joan. Great to have you with us today, Joan.
Thank you. Hi, Hannah. Thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to throw and just ask you, in your research, did the phrase at all, did you come across emotional intelligence from either side? Would that be something that you'd have sort of deemed to look at, or in your study, no, you wouldn't have used that phrase, emotional intelligence?
Could you just unpack, because I'm so used to terms being filled with
In
meaning.
the sense of a base of understanding from the tenant side and also the landlord side, expectation.
It's
both sides.
not the term emotional intelligence in the world I was looking at. it sits in intersubjective space.
Yeah.
So I'm coming at it from a location within public policy, which is interested in, it's called street level bureaucracy. You know, the people who are tasked with implementing policy, what happens in practice. And this is what the home encounters side of things is kind of about. If you wanted to use the terms, it's about introducing emotional intelligence to how home visits go, then that would be one way of putting it. And we're slightly cautious about stuff that can be easily abbreviated, because the imaginary that came to my mind with emotional intelligence was emotional metrics and emotional AI, because there's so much of associating with the word intelligence with smart homes and smart systems. So that's why I asked you to unpack it, because you've got a more human-centered meaning than metric-centered meaning. But yeah, I'll just leverage that to make a point of, we need to be clear as well about what's being talked about when talking about emotional topics. And this is why I'm drawing out that we need to be cautious about instrumentalizing emotions, because that can be manipulative. Yeah. And I lean towards using emotions to foster understanding and connection. Once you've got that, you can then start thinking of together, how can we apply emotions? But it's knowledge first, shared knowledge, then application, then evaluation, because there's always unexpected outcomes in complex systems. So
Okay.
sorry, I've deviated a bit, but
That's fine. Thank you. That's what I want. Brilliant.
Wonderful. Well, look, I mean, we're down to the last couple of minutes, and I'm aware I think we've just about touched on everything in the chat. So if I have missed your point, I do apologise, but please reach out to myself or Hannah afterwards. I know, Hannah, you're always on LinkedIn, similar to me, and people can reach out and have those chats. I think there's a lot that ties into this topic. I think we've, you've, as we mentioned when we were kind of having our pre-catch up, you're trying to cover an entire, almost thesis into a 20-minute, half an hour presentation. And so I know we've done a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I think one of the things that's come through for me in particular is that so many people in housing do care, but don't have the influence to change policies which care. And on the other side of it, there's so much pressure going on to try and care about anything and everything that people are burning out, they're exhausted because there isn't the support there to help people do the jobs they really want to do. And so people are then moving jobs and trying to find this magical place which is going to do it. And there are some amazing businesses out there doing some amazing work, but unfortunately there's a lot that aren't maybe being led in the way that people who work in them wish to be. So where do people start? Where do people, if you were to say to them, all right, from tomorrow, start doing this or start preaching this or start, what are the, because I know you've mentioned to me, you've sat in rooms with chief execs and they've gone, oh, we didn't realize this. So where do people of all levels kind of go, what's that kind of, I guess, that first takeaway so that people can go, well, the change I want to see happen, I can start making?
I think it's start with that idea that the home is an emotional place and it's a material environment that psychologically, emotionally produces us, and we in turn shape that environment. You can't disentangle, and then see what questions that produces. So, and I would definitely say have the emotional conversations. So having that conversation with tenants about what made them angry and fearful at their request, it wasn't my idea, it was their idea, just revealed so many hidden problems that mattered for tenants. So take that understanding of home and go and talk to tenants about it and ask them what makes them angry and scared. Ask them what brings them joy about the home, and work with people who have got research skills to turn these into useful research projects. Absolutely.
It's probably a little bit as well of being able to be willing to know, be vulnerable enough to go, right, I don't know it all. I know I might have been doing this for 20 years, but I don't know it all yet. And when I speak to someone, I need to listen to really go, actually, what is it about you that's making this place work or not? Because if someone came into my home and asked me what works and what doesn't, I rent privately, there'd be stuff I go, well, I'd like to change that and that. But until I know whether I'm here, and I've been here 2.5 years, but even I'm not changing stuff in this house because I don't know whether I'll be here in another 2 years. So why would somebody in a private, why would someone in social housing do the same?
Our emotions shape our decisions, and there needs to be more acknowledgement of that in housing. I know in my thesis I talked about envy, desire, producing some rather poor decisions, quite frankly, and where there was an evidence of humility, openness, and an acceptance of I don't know everything. That just saw some really wonderful conversations emerge, and it is approaching that. Do you know what? I just don't know. I'm interested in this. I'm thinking about this. What do you think? Start from there.
Well, thank you so much. The second half, your internet and your voice have been absolutely great. So that's been wonderful. At least, we've got all of that sorted. But I really appreciate you coming on today, sharing such huge amount of insight. We will get the presentation shared. Obviously, it's going to go up onto YouTube later today as well. So people who want to watch the presentation back and things can do. But a huge thank you to you, Hannah, for coming on today. Next week we take a little bit of a sideways step, kind of. We've got Tracy McEachran from Wish coming on, Chief Executive of Wish, coming on to talk about the Hear Her Voice project and what's been going on over the last 12 months in that. And then following that, we've got Rebecca White coming on to talk about how registered providers can help those who maybe have to bypass tenants based on affordability checks, and actually the support networks around that and what you can do to actually help people who sometimes you're told you can't help. So for now, just a massive thank you to you, Hannah. Please do reach out to Hannah on LinkedIn if you are wanting more conversations, but looking forward to catching up with you all at a roundtable soon. But Hannah, thank you very much for today.
Thanks for hosting, and sorry about the internet problems. It shows I tried to count for those, and yet they still.
Welcome to stormy England in 2024. Cheers all, and see you soon. Take care.
Bye. Bye.